This is the Pharmaverse podcast. I'm your host, Michael Pietrack, engaging leaders from the pharma universe. Hello and welcome to the Pharmaverse podcast. I'm your host, Michael Pietrack. If you're a leader or an aspiring leader in the pharmaceutical industry, you've come to the right place. Today's guest has founded 2 biotech companies and has been the CEO of 3 of them. And we're going to learn today that his career advancement was fueled by bravery in the face of risks and an unstoppable spirit. So Shawn Leland, welcome to the Pharmaverse.
Thanks, Michael. Pleasure to be here today.
All right. Well, Shawn, I love your story. I can't wait for the audience to hear it. But before we hear about your exciting business ventures and how you got there, I'd like for you to take us back all the way to the days where you were part of the Rutgers Industry Fellowship. Because I'm a big supporter of that particular fellowship. I do a lot of speaking engagements there. Tell us, how did you end up in that fellowship, and how did that prepare you for your journey and where you are today?
Yeah, thanks, Michael, for the question. I mean, I'll probably even take one step back before that and even just reflect on kind of like my PharmD clerkship rotations, which was a big part of how I got to, going into the Rutgers PharmD Pharmaceutical Fellowship program. When I was in my last year of pharmacy school, actually the first rotation I was supposed to go on was with a cardiovascular disease doctor in Syracuse, New York, and the doctor ended up calling me about 2 weeks before the rotation and said he was switching practices and he wasn't going to be able to take me. So I actually worked with the clerkship director, and they ended up finding me a new rotation to go on, which was at Roswell Park Cancer Institute. And I hated oncology going through pharmacy school. I really found kind of my passion for oncology and clinical research, et cetera, during that rotation. All the way through pharmacy school, I had kind of focused my career trajectory on cardiovascular disease, diabetes, critical care, et cetera. And a lot of that was driven by some of the challenges my dad had with cardiovascular disease and diabetes and the corresponding complications. But I fell in love with oncology. I got to interact with a lot of folks in the pharmaceutical industry. My next rotation after that was with a medical science liaison from Pfizer. And this is where I had always kind of thought coming out of pharmacy school I'd be a clinical pharmacist working in a critical care unit or something along those lines. But it's crazy how quickly just one rotation or 2 rotations can change your complete career trajectory. And I found myself as a ASHP attendee my last year of pharmacy school, where I thought I'd be applying for residency programs. I found myself applying for the Rutgers Pharmaceutical Industry Fellowship program. Specifically with Bristol Myers Squibb and Oncology Med Affairs, and I was, I think, one of 75 applicants at that time, and I was fortunate enough to be that one applicant that got into the fellowship program.
Wow! And how did the fellowship program prepare you? I mean, to launch your career, and are you still gleaning stuff that you learned during the fellowship?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the fellowship program was a great experience. I think it's as you know firsthand, it's very challenging for students coming out of pharmacy school to get straight into the industry because everyone always wants you to have that kind of industry experience. So the fellowship provides a great opportunity to get that experience over kind of a 1 to 2 year fellowship program. I spent a year with Bristol Myers Squibb and Oncology Med Affairs, all the way from learning things in, medical information to clinical operations to investigator-sponsored trials and working with field medical science liaisons. And, that's where I kind of found this passion on the, medical science liaison side for placing preclinical and clinical research collaborations and, educating and treating physicians on products that we had in development as well as in commercialization. So that experience in the fellowship really paved the path for me as I started my career into kind of full-time industry.
Got it. Okay, good. I mean, I've heard from hiring managers that Rutgers fellows are great hires. Clearly, you're in a good example of that. And one of the things I love about you, Shawn, is and you probably don't even know this about yourself, but it's like if you say you're going to do something, or if you put your mind to achieve a goal, you're going to go to it, and you're going to find a way to get there. Because I remember a conversation we had where you were like, Michael, I really want to get into business development. And I didn't know how to take you from an MSL to a business development role. And sometimes candidates will ask me this, and I basically say, I don't know how you do it. So what are some things that someone could do to make that leap from maybe a field medical position into a business development role?
Yeah, so I think determination and drive, as you've mentioned, is a key component of my success. I think even, kind of coming out of the fellowship program, I was very determined to go into being a medical science liaison. And, BMS had wanted me to go into a med info role before going to the medical science liaison role. So I ended up interviewing outside because I was just determined to be able to land an MSL job at the time. The business development side of things very much was a right time, right place scenario for me. I was a year and a half into the role at Lilly as a medical science liaison, and I was at a scientific conference in Berlin, and I was at a Lilly reception talking to the guy who was the chief scientific officer at Lilly at that time. A huge kind of career inspirer for me, and someone I talk to, still quite frequently on at least a monthly basis to date. So I was talking with him, and he's like, you know a lot about oncology. We were talking about different things I had seen at the conference, and he's like, I just had a spot open up in my group doing oncology search and evaluation, scouting assets for licensing, companies for mergers and acquisitions. He's like, how would you feel about doing a temporary assignment with my group? And I'm like, this sounds really interesting. I'm not sure I'm qualified. I'm not sure I know what this even entails, but I'm willing to give it a go. So I ended up talking with my manager at the time. She was in agreement. So I ended up doing the temporary assignment. It's supposed to be 6 months, ended up being 3 months. And then I went into that role full time, which is really kind of what started my career on the business development side, and honestly was one of the biggest career moves in terms of, shaping kind of my expertise and background and just how I look at things today in the industry. So it was such a phenomenal move. But I would say, and to address your question, business development is not an easy area to get into. I remember even as a fellow at BMS, talking to, the person at the time who was kind of in charge of oncology business development there. And they're like, you need at least 15 years worth of experience to get into this area. And, I'm well aware of kind of other fellows that have kind of gone into BD, and there are now BD fellowships, which also make kind of an easier path to get into. So I think, if that's an area that you want to get into, there are, fellowship programs to pursue business development in the pharmaceutical industry. I think outside of that, kind of this ability to do a rotation or a temporary assignment is the best way to kind of get exposure and get your foot in the door there. I do feel like business development is an area where there tends to be a desire for someone who's typically with a PhD background, but there are now, I feel like a decent number of us with PharmDs that are in the business development space. I think it's important to either, you could potentially come in with an MBA. You need to either learn the kind of business side as you go. I think, the way you differentiate in that space is, making sure that you have kind of deep clinical scientific expertise, but also, have kind of the business acumen. That will make you stand out in that space. And, I think there's others that I've spoken with that have also kind of gone down this path of, getting some kind of initial, analyst level work, kind of in the, investment bank, investment research area, those types of things, are also, I feel like, good background of like kind of gaining an understanding of how to do due diligence that may also lend a path, to getting into the business development field.
Wow. Okay. Those are all great insights. And then I remember seeing you at ASCO. And I think you were in the business development role at that time. And then a couple years went by, and the next thing I know, you're founding a company called Elevation Oncology.
Yeah.
Can you relate to us the story of how you acquired that asset? What led up to that? Tell us that story. It's a great story.
Yeah, so I was working at Veristem Oncology at the time, doing business development. I came across this opportunity, to pursue this target NRG1 and the ability to drug it with a HER3 monoclonal antibody approach. And I pitched the idea actually to Veristem, and they're like, it's just too small of a commercial opportunity. And I personally thought it was just too good to be true. So in my kind of hours outside of Veristem, I started to kind of pitch this idea to investors. And, I randomly came across this idea. I was sitting in a scientific presentation, ESMO of 2018 in Munich, session from Alex Drillin at Memorial Sloan Kettering. And he was presenting on targeted therapies in non-small cell lung cancer. And he had one slide on this target neuregulin-1 or NRG1 gene fusions. And it was very much kind of a flashback to me of, when I first saw, kind of NTRK fusions sitting in, Ross Camage and Bob Doble's office at, University of Colorado. And they're showing me these like fascinating like preclinical in vivo models where, you could give this, drug, which at the time was being used for, neurology, and they had put it into some mice, that had these NTRK gene fusions, and you just saw like, phenomenal regressions in those models. And, that company was later founded, by Josh Billinker, and this is, what became Loxo Oncology, and an $8 billion sale later to Lilly. And, when I saw this, NRG1 fusion opportunity, I had very similar sentiments to when I saw this NTRK data, and seeing what, Josh was able to do with Loxo. I thought there might be the same opportunity to do something like that around neuregulin-1 or NRG1 gene fusions. So I ended up, coming back from seeing that presentation. I talked to, people that I know closely. The first person I actually reached out to was Lori Kunkel, who was the original chief medical officer at Loxo. And I said, hey, I came across this like cool idea. What do you think about this? And she's like, it'll work. She's like, you're just gonna have to figure out how to find the patients. And I'm like, I think we can figure that part out. So I came back, I pulled all of the literature around NRG1 fusions, found several case studies, where there were, responses, clinical activity, where you drug these with, HER3 monoclonal antibody approaches. And at that time, HER3 was kind of viewed as a target, a failed asset. There had been a number of experiences, of molecules going into HER3 overexpressed cancers, where there just wasn't robust clinical activity, as opposed to going into this kind of true oncogenically driven population where there was very robust responses. So I started pitching this idea to investors and quickly realized there was quite a bit of interest. I had never saw myself as an entrepreneur, CEO, founder. It was not something I ever thought about, and I think I was 35 at the time when I started pursuing this. But I quickly figured that piece out. I leveraged a colleague who was very well known kind of in the investor space. He connected me with a lot of people. He and I spoke of, who are the investors in Blueprint and Loxo and Ignita, and I'm like, these are the same people where this idea and concept is going to resonate. And then that's kind of exactly what happened. I knew the due diligence piece. So, I had started talking to several companies that had HER3 monoclonal antibody approaches that, I could in-license or acquire, and, quickly found a group of investors who were interested. So I saw this idea, November of 2018, fast forward to July 12th of 2019. That morning, closed a Series A financing of $32.5 million. Wow. And then that afternoon, we closed the asset purchase agreement with Merrimack Pharmaceuticals to acquire seribantumab, which was a phase 2 ready asset. And we quickly found ourselves in the clinic in a phase 2 study with registrational intent, enrolling solid tumors with NRG1 fusions 12 months later. And over the course of that journey, raised over 200 million of capital for the company, took the company public, brought that asset to clinical proof of concept. And we did a variety of other licensing transactions, including bringing in a Claudin 18.2 ADC program that just had clinical proof of concept data at ASCO last year.
Wow, what a story. I mean, talk about trusting your gut, talk about, putting all your chips on the table and trusting what you see, even if other people aren't seeing it, and going for it. That's why I love that story so much.
Yeah.
But a 35-year-old starting a company, taking an asset to the market, taking a company public, I mean, these are no small feats, Shawn. I mean,
Yeah.
I gotta think that there were tons of roadblocks and challenges. If anyone listening is thinking about doing something like this, what were the 3 biggest challenges that you faced?
Yeah, there was a number of challenges along the way. I mean, I think honestly the biggest challenge, came, just kind of came, right up front, right? I mean, starting up a company, like I had never done it before. I knew nothing about, kind of like what it fully entailed. So, I mean, I think one of the biggest pieces of advice I can offer to people is, make sure that you are well connected with folks that you can reach out to. I mean, I was able to leverage kind of my network all along the way to, figuring out how to do things from, setting up HR to setting up, IT. I mean, these little things that sometimes I think, probably several of us take for granted, at a mid-sized to large pharmaceutical company where all these things are just plug and play. I mean, all of these things had to be set up and built from the ground up. So I think, having a network and being well connected, whether that's on the investor side, whether that's on the board side, those things I feel like are extremely helpful for, kind of laying the groundwork and foundation. Some venture capital firms that they have all this stuff, it's plug and play, right? They want you to be able to focus on operational execution and just be kind of like heads down on the science and the clinical development piece. But I was not in that scenario where like those things were plug and play. You go and work with a Third Rock Ventures, for example, and they have all that stuff in-house. They've done this time and time again, and they have their IT person, they have their HR person, and like you can just leverage all of the resources that they have. I had to build all of that, kind of from the ground up, which definitely took some time to do. I think the other things that are kind of, steep learning curves, this is kind of my first time as, CEO, really kind of my first time having kind of in-depth interactions, with investors, with board members. So, even just kind of like understanding kind of like corresponding board etiquette and like how to work with investors and like how to bring investors and board members along. That was a steep learning curve and experience. I mean, I was, fortunate to work closely with Steve Elms from Mason Capital, who kind of led the Series A financing for Loxo. So I was able to leverage a lot of learnings from him, and he was, I feel like, very helpful, in that regard.
What I'm picturing, Shawn, just so you kind of see, what I'm picturing is like every day of your life is Shark Tank.
Yes, yeah, there is, to a certain degree, it is very much like that. I think, in addition to that, probably I feel like the last, kind of learning curve piece was, that transition from private to public. It's just, it's a very, very different job and role as a, private company CEO versus a public company CEO. So, I mean, I think learning, just kind of like the nuances of being a public company CEO and, what you can or can't say and like, what you can or can't do and all of these things, those were probably the things that were, like the biggest challenges for me and like the biggest learning curves, through the course of the journey for Elevation.
All right, so let me summarize that. So it was scaling to the extent of hiring all these different departments that you maybe had never been involved with before.
Yes.
Talking with the investor community, and then transitioning from private to public, and just the nuance and difference between being a CEO in one environment to another ecosystem completely. Is that?
Yeah, correct. Spot on.
This episode is brought to you by K. Bassman International, the leader in pharma and biotech recruiting. When pharma executives need to make critical hires, they go to the experts at K. Bassman, pharma's one-source staffing solution. Visit kbic.com. Now back to the episode. Wow. Well, I'm just thinking, I'm putting my recruiter hat on here.
Yeah.
When a person or company is scaling to the magnitude that you had to and doing so quickly, there's a ton of hiring that goes on.
Yes.
Over this period of time, did you develop some sort of formula or best practices that come with selecting the right candidates?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think a lot of this, I very heavily and very much so leverage my own network, which I feel like I have a pretty vast network and a lot of connections at this point, given kind of my, 15 plus years of experience in the industry at this point. So, a lot of this for me was kind of like hiring kind of A+ talent that I was, familiar with, had, perhaps worked with in the past, or, that came very highly recommended through my network. I'm also a big believer in, test driving, hires. So like this kind of theory and concept of kind of having a quote unquote 90-day consulting period where, that individual gets to see if, they're a good fit for the company and vice versa. I feel like that strategy has worked out really, really well in terms of, weeding out people that you thought might be a good fit, but you weren't 100% sure, or, someone, for example, who's, spent their entire career in big pharma and they were looking to transition to biotech. And I'm like, you're not really sure if the person has what it takes to kind of steer the ship on their own in the biotech world, and essentially kind of be an entrepreneur in an entrepreneurial company. So I think those things are key.
That's a fascinating concept. Let me learn more about that. So,
sure.
The people that you did that with, were they ones that were between jobs, or did they leave a job to do a 90-day consulting period with you with hopes that you'd hire them?
Yeah, so they're typically people that were already in like a consulting role or capacity, and we're trying to figure out if they wanted to go back into something full-time. I think there's quite a few consultants out there that are like, I want to just do the consulting thing. Like, I don't want to go back in full time, but I think every one of them has that itch, and every one of them has kind of, that desire to, be 100% and be a part of something and to build something. Right. So, I think all those people are, up for negotiation. It's just, making sure that there's the right opportunity that's attractive enough to get them back in the quote unquote game. So, I think that's where most of those individuals have come from. But there's also the scenario you mentioned, folks that were, had left a job, they, either were kind of like burnt out wherever they were, and just needed to take a break. And we're just kind of, testing the field by consulting for, a couple of different companies before going back into something full time. So I feel like both of those scenarios have come to fruition, at least with individuals that I've brought on board.
Wow, it's a fascinating concept. That is really a unique hiring strategy. One of the things from an outsider looking in, if I could imagine what it's like to be a CEO of a small, growing, startup-y type biotech, you would actually have two vantage points. You would be in the trees, but then also at times you would be above the trees. So you kind of have both vantage points. So I want to talk about both of those. So first, in the trees, what are the challenges facing pharma right now?
Yeah. So, I think, the biggest challenge right now, facing pharma is, there's just a lot of companies out there, and there's a lot of innovation. And I think the ability to just be competitive is a challenge. I think we went through kind of, this financing boom, a couple years back, and there's a lot of capital that went into a lot of different companies. And there's just only so much capital to go around, in the ecosystem. And I think, a lot of investors have had challenges, over the past kind of, 12 to 24 months. You've even seen certain kind of, venture capital funds no longer be able to raise capital. So I think, the financing environment is honestly one of our, biggest challenges, at this time. I think one of the other, big challenges in particular, like a space that I'm close to is kind of the precision oncology space, and the need for a greater percentage of patients to have access to next generation sequencing or NGS testing to understand in these cancer patients what is potentially driving that tumor growth and proliferation, to be able to see kind of the full potential of these precision oncology products. I mean, when you think back of the history of oncology drug development, we've now moved towards this kind of era of being able to personalize therapies for each and every patient, which is great in theory, but the only way to be able to execute on that strategy is to make sure patients have access to testing. And you look at the numbers today, and you look at how good the technology is that we have, and you think it would be much greater than kind of 15 to 20% of patients getting next generation sequencing and genomic testing. It's honestly such a travesty in the industry that not a greater percentage of patients have access to this testing, because there's so many patients that could derive benefit, but they don't know what's driving their tumor growth and proliferation. I think this is a huge area where we need to improve to be able to provide access for those types of therapies to be able to see their full potential.
So you're saying right now the biggest challenges from where you sit are economics. Money's expensive, just getting investment dollars. Secondarily, a lot of the innovation, specifically in oncology, is in the precision medicine space. And that comes with testing, genetic testing or some sort of testing before the person receives treatment. And there's an access issue there.
Yep.
Those are real world issues that a lot of the listeners are also facing. So now when you think about you being above the trees, those problems are in the trenches. As you look out over the forest, what future problems are coming right around the corner? What's out there, and how can leaders be prepared for that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's so much innovation going on, whether it's in the AI space, with the kind of next generation biologics, whether it's kind of gene therapies, whether it's CAR T therapies, cellular therapies, etc. I think one of the kind of future problems that we're going to have to face is how we're able to bring these very expensive therapies to patients in a cost-effective manner. I think we're seeing kind of the government get more involved with pricing, and these are real pressures that companies are facing in this day and age. So as you've got the government pressure, which is trying to drive down cost of medicine, but you also have like such a high degree of innovation in products that are extremely expensive to manufacture. So I mean, I think the future challenges that this industry faces is how do you kind of marry those two things together? It's like, how do you continue to foster innovation that's growing significantly, and kind of marry that with kind of the pricing pressures that kind of the industry is facing. I think that from my perspective is one of the biggest challenges that we face going forward as an industry.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think you're alluding to the IRA, and it's like, these things cost a lot of money to make, but it's sad that the patient has to bear the brunt of the cost, or at least the people paying insurance companies, and it's a big problem. It certainly is. Now, sadly, our time is starting to come to an end here, so I have one final question for you.
Sure.
You go from a Rutgers fellow to an MSL to a BD position to a founder, CEO, and now, the sky's the limit for you. Who knows what's next for you? There are going to be people that are listening to this that are maybe in an MSL position, or maybe they're in a business development position, or maybe they're just a fellow. What is your words of encouragement for someone like that, or any words of wisdom as they navigate their career?
Yeah, so I mean, I think a big part of what's helped me get to where I am today is kind of hard work, determination, and networking. I would highly encourage people to stay connected, stay in touch, and always keep your eyes open. You never know, when you're walking into a scientific session and you might come across something special. And I would just encourage people to be brave. I mean, it was not easy for me to make the decision to go out and try to raise capital. I mean, it's very easy to say, I've never done this before, I'm not going to do it. I would encourage people to take the leap, to take that risk. There's nothing more rewarding than taking that leap. And I'll never forget, when I founded Elevation, we got into the clinic, we treated our first patient, and coming up on Thanksgiving of treating that first patient, this patient, with stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer, who had exhausted all options. And this patient had no other options left. She found out she had an NRG1 fusion. She went on to the trial, and where she was probably told she had 3 to 6 months left to live, that patient ended up having a complete response. There's nothing more rewarding than hearing those stories and knowing that patient had the opportunity to go to their Thanksgiving dinner and tell their family that I may have told you I had 3 to 6 months, but my tumor is now gone. These are the opportunities, and I feel like the rewards that come from taking that leap. So I think be brave, be determined, and the sky's the limit. You'll never regret making that decision. There may be failures along the way, and there's definitely going to be challenges along the way. But the ability to change someone's life, it's truly a gift.
Wow. Man, that really hit me in the heart. Could you imagine being at that dinner, receiving that kind of news?
Yeah.
Shawn, that's what I would use to describe you as brave. I said it in the outset. I think that is the defining word of your career. And heck, it's still on the way up. Who knows where it's going? But on behalf of all in the Pharmaverse, I just want to thank you for your time. Yeah, sure. Your time is valuable. Your insights have been valuable. I loved hearing the story again and hearing little nuances that I never heard before. So as always, thank you so much, and I'm rooting for you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Michael. It's an absolute pleasure. Very much enjoy working with you, and look forward to seeing what the future holds.
Great. Shawn Leland's a great follow on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to connect with you as well. But that wraps up another episode of the Pharmaverse. Many more great leaders to come, so stay tuned. Thanks for listening. See you next time. Thanks for joining us on the Pharmaverse podcast. Make sure you subscribe below so you don't miss any leadership insights. Like and comment. I would love to hear from you. We'll see you on the next episode of Pharmaverse.